Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the afternoon session focused on computational psychiatry. And it's my pleasure to kick off this session with a research talk. And this is entitled Grasp Generative Models Combining Reward Associations and Social Learning for Psychosis. Okay, I'm going to begin. Okay, it's my pleasure to present this work to you today. And first, to introduce myself, my name is Andrea Diaconescu. I'm one of the co-organizers of this meeting, and I'm an independent scientist at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health at the Krembil Center for Neuroinformatics. And I'm very happy to be organizing this virtual meeting, bringing so many people together from all over the world. First, I want to start the talk by acknowledging the contributions and the work of mentors and colleagues. A lot of the work that I will be presenting today was achieved in close collaboration with the Transnational Neuromodeling Unit under the mentorship of Klaas and Stefan. I want to acknowledge my team in Basel, Switzerland. Daniel Hauke will present in the trainee session, as well as my team in Toronto. Paul Villas-Carvelis will also present today. And finally, and most importantly, I would like to acknowledging my family for making this possible, for allowing me to co-organize and present. Since we are all in lockdown under one roof, we're simultaneously juggling, giving talks, playing with Lego, and trying to do our research. So I'm really grateful to my husband, Lars, and to my son, Emil, for making this possible. So I want to start the talk with schizophrenia. So schizophrenia is a debilitating disorder that completely alters one's perception of reality. And I've been fascinated by schizophrenia for many years, as one could say is one of the most intrusive brain diseases, because it alters one's perception of reality. One patient said, "My senses are sharpened. Sights and sounds possess a keenness I have never experienced before." Another patient reported, "I had to make sense, any sense, out of all of these uncanny coincidences, and I did it by drastically changing my conception of reality." When we look at these two testimonials, it is apparent to us that this is a disorder that progresses in stages, that is highly heterogeneous. Schizophrenia is a lifelong disease. In Canada, it has about a prevalence of 1 to 1.2%, and approximately 1/3 of the people that are diagnosed with schizophrenia require institutionalization for the rest of their lives. And that's because there are certain symptoms of schizophrenia that remain quite resilient, that do not go away with treatment. So one receives a diagnosis of schizophrenia if he or she meets at least 2 of these symptoms for over 1 month. So it is clear from this that often schizophrenia is diagnosed late in the progression, in the actual progression of the disease. Now, the typical treatment of schizophrenia is using antipsychotic medication, dopamine D2 receptor antagonists, that is often paired with cognitive behavioral therapy. However, there are certain symptoms that are treatment resistant, and an individual's functional status is often not returned to the original state due to the recurring hospitalization and the occupational disability. So why don't we have a better treatment of schizophrenia or a cure for that matter? And the answer might have to do with how soon we detect it and diagnose it, and the type of treatments that we use. So schizophrenia as a treatment is a spectrum disorder, which means that individuals with completely different symptoms receive the same diagnosis. Treatment is also unspecific, and this means that individuals with the same symptoms may have completely different treatment response trajectories. And why is that? And that's because the treatment response might arise from different and very distinct neural mechanisms. So the approach that we've taken is to try to focus on a subset of symptoms and try to understand them. So irrespective of the diagnosis, try to understand how they emerge and how they persist. And the symptoms that I've been focusing on are delusions. Delusions are beliefs that are held with absolute conviction, despite strong evidence to the contrary, and they're highly resistant to change. About 70% of individuals with psychosis experience persecutory delusions at some point during the disease trajectory. And that is paranoia, or beliefs that the world is revolving around me and they are all in on it. Persecutory beliefs are particularly challenging, not only from a treatment perspective, but because they significantly impair individuals' lives. They have been associated with increased risk of suicide and higher relapse rates. So what is GRASP? So this is a computational framework that focuses on specific symptoms in psychiatry, such as delusions, and integrates three main components. The first is a probabilistic learning task that is specifically crafted to probe specific symptoms. And in this case, persecutory ideation. The second is the application of a computational model of behavior, such as the hierarchical Gaussian filter, which I will talk about, that proposes a mechanism of underlying belief formation, in particular in the context of the symptom at hand. And the third component of this is to incorporate this computational framework alongside this task in a longitudinal fashion in order to capture the entire disease trajectory within the individual and try to predict how certain symptoms emerge, why they persist, and how they might respond to treatment interventions. So what is the computational framework that we refer to? So the intuition here is that the brain is a Bayesian inference machine, or it functions to predict states in the world. And this sort of hypothesis testing function of the brain is at its core is this updating process, a continuous updating process that allows predictions to be made and refined via prediction errors. Prediction errors arise when there is a discrepancy between one's model of the world and the sensory data that enters the brain through the senses. So the filter that the brain provides can be thought of as prediction error updating, as a prediction error updating process. So at the heart of this conceptualization is the Bayes rule that conceptualizes beliefs as probability distributions. So predictions change as a function of prior beliefs under a specific model of the world. And the sensory data, the likelihood that is obtained from the world, that is normalized by the evidence. And this continuous process allows for a fine-tuning of the model and for beliefs to become more and more adaptive to the environment that the individual resides in. Now, if we take this simple Bayes rule in a hierarchical fashion, We can propose a generic model of learning, the hierarchical Gaussian filter, developed by Christoph Mathis. This model proposes that belief updates are proportional not only to prediction errors, but to a ratio of precisions. In the numerator, we have the sensory precision that amplifies the impact that prediction errors have on one's model of the world. So unpredictable events or events that have high sensory acuity will have a strong impact on our model and function to refine it. Now, in the denominator, we have the belief precision, and that's the agent's confidence in his or her model, the belief that the model that they've learned and developed is the correct one, and that dampens the impact that prediction errors have. And you can intuit that this dance or this push and pull between the sensory precision and the belief precision allow us to form a learning rate that is adaptive to the stochasticity of the environment that we reside in. And of course, the assumption here is that in psychiatric disorders like schizophrenia, this dance is perturbed in some way, where the sensory precision sometimes has an overly powerful impact on the belief update, and on the other hand, on the other extreme, the belief precision has too strong of an impact, allowing the model to become too brittle and non-adapted to the environment. The generative model assumes hierarchical causes of social inputs. The inputs experienced by an agent are the output of associations whose strength changes over time. The association strength, in turn, depends on the context in which it occurs, and that's the volatility. That means that the model assumes that an agent is not only learning about the association strength of two sets of events, but also the likelihood that that association strength is valid at any point in time. So, in other words, it assumes that the agent infers on context or on volatility. If we have the following scenario here, in red, you have the belief update of one fictional agent. In green, you have the sensory output that that agent experiences that has a probability of 50%. You see that the belief update hovers around that probability. Now that event starts to change. So the association strength becomes much more precise in that it's predictive, going from high probability to low probability and switching from those two phases rapidly. Now, if you place the individual in the original context that they experienced with a probability of 50%, we see that the magnitude of that belief update is much larger. And that is because the individual is expecting there to be ensuing change or volatility in the environmental context and is prepared to learn. And that's because the individual infers on an increasing volatility of the association strength of that event. Here are the additional mathematical details. So the assumption in this model is that states evolve in time as Gaussian random walks, where the variance of the state at the current level depends on the mean at the next higher level. This essentially means that when the environment is stable, the variance around that association strength is very small or very tight, meaning that there is a precise prediction of a given association strength. Now, when the environment becomes more volatile, the variance around that association strength becomes larger or flatter, meaning that the learning rate increases, meaning that the association strength, meaning that there is an underlying increased uncertainty about the association strength at that moment in time. Now, the dynamics of these states, not only the means, but also the variances or their inverse, their precisions, is determined by a set of parameters. In this case, for instance, we have parameter theta that determines how quickly this volatility, the state, changes in time. We can have additional parameters that describe different levels of interaction between these two states, such as parameter kappa that I will talk about later, that captures how strongly these states are coupled and how much they influence each other over time. Now, how do we bring this in the context of psychosis? And I talk about psychosis because I'm referring to psychotic symptoms that show a kind of developmental trajectory over time. So what happens in the at-risk state that could be described by this quote, "My senses are sharpened"? The hypothesis is that in this state, there's an enhanced sensory precision of incoming prediction errors, which means that due to an overactive dopaminergic system, an individual feels bombarded by surprising events, by inputs that appear to be relevant at a certain moment in time. That causes the predictive model, the higher level model, to become more brittle and more uncertain, because it brings the individual in a regime where it says basically it is adaptive to learn very quickly. This would be the state that would be most adaptive for an environment that is truly extremely volatile. So for instance, in cases of pandemics or protests, such a model might be highly adaptive, being ready to learn very quickly. Of course, for stable environments, this would not be an adaptive model. So we tested this hypothesis in a study where clinically high-risk individuals and healthy controls performed a probabilistic reward learning task in the scanner. And the idea is that people had to learn which of the two cues, which of the two fractal patterns was associated with reward. And if they predicted correctly, they would win the number of points displayed on those cards. Now, importantly, the task structure was designed in such a way that at the beginning, there was a stable association, the association reversed, and then the association strength became more volatile. So we had these two groups, and the clinically high-risk individuals were also assessed from a clinical perspective related to global functioning and positive symptoms. In this study, we hypothesized a Ornstein-Uhlenbeck process. So this is a type of HGF that assumes that abnormal beliefs in early psychosis can be explained by an Ornstein-Uhlenbeck process in discrete time, where beliefs about the volatility of state space drift towards an equilibrium point. In other words, we posited that paranoia could be described as an increasingly more volatile perception of the world and of others. We can so this type of Ornstein-Uhlenbeck process is akin to incorporating sort of memory decay in a learning model. So the idea that states are not evolving in time only as precision-weighted prediction errors, are not changing only as precision-weighted prediction errors, but they're slowly transitioning. The hypothesis would be that in an optimal agent, they would transition towards their priors, but in this case, we predicted that they would transition to higher and higher levels, meaning higher and higher perception of volatility. So we are particularly interested in the parameters that capture the dynamics of the higher level state related to the perception of volatility, in particular M, which is the equilibrium point in this case. We took a model comparison approach and compared different models of learning in this case, including reinforcement learning models, non-hierarchical models, and different types of HGF models. We found that the proposed mean reverting model explained participants' behavior best, and it explained participants' behavior in both groups, so healthy controls and the clinically high-risk individuals. Now, what we did is that we extracted the belief updates from the winning model for each individual, and we wanted to see whether the parameters that capture their dynamics were actually different between the two groups. And we found that this equilibrium point that determined the volatility increase at the third level was significantly different between controls and clinically high-risk individuals. If we look at the belief update, what this means is that in the clinically high-risk individuals, once a reversal takes place, there is a bigger jump towards a perception of heightened volatility. You see that this jump is not increasing the more volatility we inject into the task, but that this biggest jump is from the stable phase to the first reversal. And if we look at the individual belief trajectories, and this is quite a busy slide, but what this reflects are belief updates at the three levels of this hierarchy. So this is the estimated probability of a given visual cue that to be rewarding. This is the tendency of that association strength and how it varies in time. And this is the volatility of that tendency. And these are the individual subjects' decisions. And in the green circles, these are the sensory inputs that are presented. So what you see here is that in healthy controls, they start at different prior levels of volatility and sort of fluctuate around those levels. But when we look at the clinical high-risk individuals, we see this increasing perception of volatility over time. And this is particularly significant because what it means is that the learning rate is increasingly higher as they observe new inputs. So as they observe new inputs, they perceive the environment to be more volatile. And the biggest jump in their perception of volatility happens with the first reversal. Now, we also looked at the neural representations of the learning of the key learning computational variable, the outcome precision weighted prediction error, and fitting an individual GLM for each participant, we found that at the group level, so basically across all subjects in healthy controls and clinically high-risk individuals, we found particular regions to encode the outcome precision weighted prediction error. This includes the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the anterior insula, and the posterior parietal cortex. But now when we compared clinically high-risk individuals and healthy controls in terms of the representation of this prediction error, we found an enhanced representation of outcome precision weighted prediction errors in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex region. And this was very interesting because it suggested an increased neural representation of incoming low-level precision-weighted prediction errors, exactly what we had hypothesized. Now we asked, is this actually clinically valid? So we extracted the beta estimates of that effect in the clinically high-risk individuals, in a specific ROI, region of interest, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And we found that it was particularly associated with a reduced global functioning. So the higher the representation of this prediction error, the poorer the clinical outcome of that individual. So the conclusion here is that in this preliminary study, there's a suggestion of a reduced model precision or enhanced uncertainty about one's model of the world in the at-risk population due to a heightened perception of change or volatility in the association strength. And at the neural level, we see an enhanced representation of these low-level precision-weighted prediction errors. Okay, so the suggestion is that in the clinical high risk, the model, one's model of the world, may be tuned for an overly volatile environment, signaling the necessity of an enhanced learning rate. What about when delusions are formed and when an individual becomes convinced that those delusions represent true states in the world? So we investigated the impact of persecutory delusions with a task that's specifically designed to probe them. And this was an advice-taking task that was based on an interaction between a player and an advisor. So the main task is a binary lottery when one has to predict the outcome. It's a binary outcome. And the predictions are based on advice from another agent who receives privileged information. So you can think about this as a simulating investment scenario. So you have the person that wants to invest and the advisor that has knowledge of the stock market and is there to provide suggestions. And here I say knowledge of the stock market because we ensure that the advisor doesn't have full information, that only obtains partial information, although this information is substantially better than the players. And we created incentives for the advisor and for the player that allowed them to collaborate at the beginning of this task. So in other words, the advisor wants the player to accumulate points and provides helpful information as best as the advisor can. But in the middle of the task, we created opposing goals so that the advisor is incentivized to actually provide purposely inaccurate information to the player. So in a way, the scenario you can think of is the stockbroker has other interests, has investors' interests that is trying to maximize at a certain point in time. And the player basically has to learn this and has to adapt to the advisor's changing intentions. So we translated this game to a setting that could be played in a scanner or with EEG recordings where we presented the advice via video clips. And it was essentially the same setup. Now, in order to probe paranoia and persecutory beliefs, we did an additional manipulation. And this manipulation was used to provide the individual with sort of reputation priors about the advisor. And we wanted to see how those affected individuals' beliefs and learning from the advice. So we had a dispositional focus where we focused on the advisor as potentially having a hidden agenda. And the second was a situational focus where we drew subjects' attention to the rules of the game. So essentially, we changed one sentence in the instructions that basically bias people's attention towards those two aspects of the task. And the important thing is that was the subjects that we tested. So we wanted to look at individuals that displayed stable persecutory beliefs about others' intentions. So in this protocol, we pre-screened over 1,000 participants, and we only selected those that showed sort of a stable expression of paranoia over time. So we took individuals that had very low paranoid beliefs and individuals that had very high paranoid beliefs. So we have the low persecutory delusion and the high persecutory delusion groups that were matched on several other variables. What we found when they performed the task was that the individuals in the highly paranoid group, they were not sensitive to this frame. So they treated the advisor in the situational frame as if he or she had a hidden agenda. Whereas the low paranoid group, they were highly sensitive to the frame and learned very differently in spite of the fact that the input structure was identical. We also saw a group difference in the individuals' debriefings and how they described that their performance on the task. The advisor intentionally provided incorrect advice in order to prevent me from scoring points. We modeled that behavior using a family of models ranging from more complex hierarchical Bayesian ones to reinforcement learning models. And we found that the first model here, 3-level hierarchical Gaussian filter, is explain participants' behavior best. So this is the model. And here we have 2 parameters of interest, the coupling and the evolution rate for the association strength. And these are models that capture the lower level learning or belief updating about the advisor fidelity. And we focused our hypotheses on these parameters that determine the evolution of those beliefs about fidelity, as well as a parameter that captured the social bias towards the advisor, the additional bias towards the advisor in terms of the belief to decision mapping. And we found a significant group by task interaction. So we found 2 parameters that explain this behavioral difference in taking advice into account. And this was the evolution rate parameter and the social bias. What this essentially indicates is that the high PD individuals are confident in their beliefs about the advisor trying to mislead, and therefore do not show any effects of the frame, in comparison to the low PD individuals that show a higher learning rate when we provide the wrong reputation prior on the advisor. And we see the same effect expressed in the social bias. So the high PD group generally do not show a difference in their degree of reliance on the advisor. So what this suggests is that when delusions become persistent and stable, they can be explained by an overly enhanced belief precision that reduces the impact that prediction errors have on beliefs. Now, we can put this in a continuum and say that in the at-risk phase, we have this enhanced learning rate due to a reduced belief precision, whereas in the psychosis-prone phase, we have an increased belief precision that leads to a reduced incorporation of new prediction errors into one's beliefs. So through simulations, one can simulate different and predict different learners at these different phases of the psychosis progression, one in which the learning rates are overly high and beliefs are volatile, and in the second phase when beliefs are overly stable and do not take new evidence into account. Because of the correlates with neuronal representations, we can also propose specific cognitive network models that could explain these behavioral differences. Now, if we extend this to other disorders or that exhibit impairments in social cognition, we see some very interesting differences as well. So this was a study done in collaboration with Lara Henko and Leo Schilbach in Munich and Christoph Matis in Aarhus. And this was a study of implicit reliance on the advice from perception of gaze. So similar to the advice taking task that I presented earlier, now the advice is provided via changes in eye direction. And what we find when we test healthy controls, individuals with major depression, individuals with schizophrenia, and individuals with borderline personality disorders, we find that in terms of the low-level learning rates, we see a reduced expression, reduced low-level learning rates in individuals with schizophrenia and borderline personality disorder. So this suggests this is something similar from what we found in the delusion proneness group. So an increased reliance on one's prior beliefs. Now, when we look at the third level learning rate about volatility, we see that the borderline personality disorder individuals segregate from the other three groups in interesting ways, showing an enhanced learning rate about volatility. We see an increased social bias in the schizophrenia and the borderline personality disorder group. And the interesting sort of take-home message here that we see is that we have this segregation between low-level learning and high-level learning that relates to different psychiatric disorders. So in schizophrenia and borderline personality disorder individuals, similarly to subclinical persecutory ideation, we see an enhanced belief precision that leads to a reduced learning rate. Whereas in borderline personality disorder, we see a reduced belief precision about volatility. So now we're talking about the higher level, about the contextual beliefs that is expressed across modalities, but only affects decisions in the social domain. So we can posit that in borderline personality disorder, we might see an increased representation of the sensory precision of contextual prediction errors, akin to what we observed in the high-risk mental state. So I would like to end my presentation by acknowledging my collaborators in Toronto, in Zurich, in Basel, and across Europe, as well as my funding sources. And thank you for your attention. Okay, so any questions? So the first question, negative and positive symptoms of schizophrenia seem very disparate to me. The only way I can put them under one umbrella is that they both can reappear in the trajectory of the illness in the same person. I was wondering, can you explain the appearance of negative symptoms in your framework or other forms of hierarchical Bayesian inference? Yeah, so this is a very good question. And I think it's a little bit different than positive symptoms, obviously, such as delusions. The way I would answer this question is in the following way. So one way to make sense of incoming prediction errors is to adapt your beliefs, form new beliefs, fine-tune your model of the world. The other way that you can make sense of prediction errors is to change your action, change how you sample the world. And it might be that under an enhanced perception of incoming sensory precision-weighted prediction errors, one way to change your beliefs is to, form strange explanations that are the delusions. But the other way is to try to reduce this volatile input that is coming from the environment by essentially making the environment more stable and actually withdrawing and making your actions as repetitive and as predictable as possible. And so I would say that it could be that negative symptoms can be explained by different ways of adjusting to enhance precision of incoming prediction errors through action and sampling, as opposed to through belief updating. Okay, were the two arms of control and high-risk groups tested on their IQ and screened for autism? Yes, tested for their IQ, but they were not screened for autism. Okay, have these experiments been conducting comparing treated and untreated or treatment-resistant patients with psychiatric disorders? And no, they have not. They have been used to investigate treated patients. I would point you to the work of De Serno et al. For that. Okay, so I would like to move everyone over to the next research talk. So thank you so much for attending, and let's hear more about action sampling from Maxwell Ramstad.